I must say that English is not my usual language, and I must apologize, but I prefer to communicate with you in an understandable and sustainable language. Our subject is not a theoretical or a rhetorical one. It takes place in this Congress as an illustration of the interaction between law and religion in general, but it is rooted in the most sad of the daily French life confronted to the Islamic temptation today. Today in Toulouse, the First Minister of Israel and the French President are meeting together in Toulouse. In this context, the French Jewish community is in the front line, without comparison with all the other communities living in the French territory. You know all the bloody events that have occurred in March in Toulouse. A young French Muslim named Mohamed Merah, with the two nationalities, French and Algerian, in name of Islam, as he understood it, and the Palestinian struggle, as he understood it, have killed first 3 anonymous soldiers of the French army in Montauban, and the morrow have murdered 3 French and Jewish children in a French Jewish school. There were pupils of the school without bodyguards, and a young father of one of them called Jonathan Sandler. We must note that the murder and the assassinated people had not personal conflict. For the murderer and his supporters, because he had supported and have supported, this assassination were justified in the name of the Palestinian cause to take revenge from the Israeli army, as shown by the television, and in the name of Islam, in other terms, in the name of God himself, in the name of Allah and Muhammad, his prophet. Because Mohamed Merah refused to surrender at the French police and had fired on the man of the GIGN, the French gendarmerie, he was shot down and killed. For the French opinion in general, and especially for the Jewish community, raised the hope that so dramatic events would be the beginning of a moral and an ethical shock and the limitation of this religious violence, and for the observance of the French law as it is. I am sorry to say that the reverse is true. In many suburbs in France, in the young Islamic and other immigrated population, Mohamed Merah is exalted as a hero, and the French police is bashed. We have to note the substitution of the murderer and the murdered as the very victim of the French racism. We have to address also a delirium in all these dramatic events that are imputed to the Israeli Secret Service, to the Mossad, as usual. In the last week, another terrorist net and cell was dismantled in Strasbourg and in other towns in France, and its leader, a young French man and Christian born, finally also shot down by the French police, as which he has fired first himself. And in this time, there was no camera, no TV, and all was done outside the public vision and television. And now, the new power, the socialist power, under the presidency of François Hollande, is steering the project of a new law on the terrorist activities in the French territory, hardening all the existing disposition concerning the watch of the territory and the travel in foreign country, especially in Islamic one, of young people known as dangerous, potential dangerous people. In all these dispositifs, we have a special law adopted in March and April 2011 concerning the wearing of the Islamic women in the streets and generally in all the public space. This law is known as the anti-burqa law. And in the penal code, the correctional law of second category, and we shall see its content. But to understand the content and the intent of this law, we must first remember briefly the own constitutional and legal frame of this law in the actual state of law of France. Water, please. Thank you very much. The core of our subject is found in the French Constitution, known as the Constitution of the Fifth Republic, literally conceived and written by the General de Gaulle. The Article 1, the first article, contains the definition of the nature of the French constitutional regime, with 4 principal criteria. The French Republic is a democracy. It is a secular, a social, and more recently, a decentralized one. And this article adds other criterions. The official language is the Français. The national hymn is the Marseillaise. The French national colors are blue, white, and red. In all these criteria, we must underline one of them. The French Republic is a secular one. This not means an atheistic one. The specific meaning of this criteria must be understood by another disposition of the French Constitution related to its preamble itself. Itself refers to the Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen, concerning the liberty of faith, the liberty of belief, and the liberty to go on and return. These constitutional dispositions are articulated to the disposition of another famous law voted in 1905, namely the law concerning the separation of the state and the church. Its own content is interpreted more largely as the regime of separation between the state and all religions existing on the French territory. This famous law has 2 phases. First, the very separation of the 2 spheres. It means there is no official religion in France. The French Republic is not identified with namely the Catholic Church as it was in the ancient regime. The French Republic is a republic of all the citizens, Catholic, Protestant, Jews, Muslim, agnostic, atheistic, or non-religious people as it is. But there is another phase. This is the second phase. Separation is not war. The separation between state and religion is the same as the separation between the powers, between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. It is a check and balance between the powers considered as functions. According to this law, to this constitutional and famous law, the French state must protect and sustain the daily life of all these coexistential religion or beliefs because, and this is a fundamental principle, they are connected to public liberties. And the First and the Fifth Republic is not only a secular one, it is, as we have said, a democratic one. From 1905 to our days, all the French legislation have tried to conciliate these 2 phases, separate but sustain, sustain but separate. The exercise is not so easy. It is a very complex equilibrium, and in the beginning of the 20th and 1st century, many clashes. In the beginning of the 20th century, they had many clashes with the Catholic Church and the Catholic congregation. You know, perhaps these dark parts of the French history. And the same exercise is not less difficult today with the Arabic Islamic community, or I prefer to say with the Arabic Islamic population in France. Why? Why the law of 1905 doesn't work without hardening its content and intent? To say briefly, and to clarify and understand this new problem, you have to remind that the legal sphere, stricto sensu, is intermingling with the sociological one, the religious one, and the political one. The map of what was the religious sociology of France in 1905 has completely muted. In this time, there was a big Catholic majority with tough identity, and very small minorities, Protestant, Jew, Protestant, less than a million people, and Jew, 100,000 people. Very, really minorities. And we have to underline that the Jews and the Protestant were behalf this law of separation, because there was a protection against the Jewish, the Catholic Church of this time. But now the sociology have mutated. We have a big Catholic minority, but searching its way with a thick identity, and was the political scientist called a false minority. It is an Arabic Islamic population, and we don't know exactly the number of this population. It is oscillating between 4 million and 10 million. It is impossible to define a public policy in this uncertainty. And all the phantasms are growing in this gap. And however, the question is asked, if the Arabic Islamic population have the will to integrate the French society with his laws, with its values, and with its way of life. And the answer is not clear. It was the reason because Nicolas Sarkozy had engaged a large debate on the fundamentals of French identity. What is French identity? And what is the difference, the very thin difference, between integration and assimilation? But this project was bashed by the left because in their eyes there was a project of discrimination, and really, if the President Sarkozy had engaged this debate, the roots of this debate was not of himself. In 1989, there was in France the affair du foulard. In the public school, the French director of his school has refused to let young Islamic girls enter the school because they were harboring what is called the Islamic foulard, which was covering all the head, but not the face. For these public servants, it was an infringement of the sacrosanct principle called the principle of the neutralité in the French public school. And these young people and their parents were suspected to be manipulated by what is called radical Islamists. Then it was a very big and bitter turmoil in all the public sphere and in the media concerning these radical and subversive currents. But for the government, a law was not necessary. An advice of the Conseil d'État concerning the prohibition of visible symbols of religious belonging in the public space, and especially in the public school, was enough. But the question of the mutation of the religious sociology of France was entered in the agenda. And there were many other causes which underlined this agenda. In the beginning of the Second Intifada, all the aggressions against the Jewish population in France, all the authors of the aggressions that were arrested were Arabic Islamic people. And you must add all the demonstration concerning the Second War of Iraq. And it was many other symptoms that radical Islam was progressing in French society in spite of the inter-religious dialogue or under its cover. And it was in this context that suddenly the problem with the burqa was hardly raising, and once again we have to separate the facts and the trends. The facts. Once upon a day, the French police have arrested a young woman who was, conduire, was driving the car, and they were wearing the complete burqa. And it was dangerous for the public security. And the l'enquête was leading progressively to a husband. Was a very strange position because he was living with 4 wives. And for this one, his point of view was legitimate because it was Islamic law. But it was an infringement of the law of social aid in France. And the situation was very strange. And l'enquête has shown that under the cover of this very strange situation, he was financing his radical activities because he was pursuing the aid for the 4 wives. And it was a symptom that something very strange was coming in French society, and the debate was engaged. I cannot enter in the details. It is not prohibited to speak of the details with a coffee tea, with a cup of coffee, but it is my first joke. The fact that what happens here was a sample was happening and emerging in the French society. Thus, the methodology was dictated by itself. If a law was necessary, a law to abstain from Islamophobia or arbitrary position, this law must be elaborated and voted in the absolute respect of the French state of law. It was not political, it was also pedagogical law. And not as a legislation d'exception, as the expression of the Islamophobia, this term which is flourishing in the shadow of the real Judeophobia. In the French Parliament, many hearings were organized and committed to the subject. Their principles were debated fiercely. And 2 of them. First, if the burqa is an Islamic commandment, is it compatible with the French Constitution and the French Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen, which postulate the equality with between men and women? Second, if the burqa is compatible with the European legislation concerning the public liberties and also the status of women in democratic states. The debate was in honor of the French democracy. There was a very interesting discrepancy between the advice of the Conseil d'État and the advice of the Conseil constitutionnel. A very new discussion on what is the immaterial public order. You have to answer 1 second in this debate. In France, you cannot argue of your liberty to infringe other liberties. You cannot say it is my liberties and it is not your liberties. So it's calling public order. And that, actually the problem is raising about the public order confronting this strange position, because many of the young women say it is with my own consent they accept polygamy de facto and accept the burqa. It is my liberty to dispose of my own body. And it was a very first debate on this subject. And there was confronting two other necessities, the necessity of security, because there is terrorism in France, and the necessity not to infringe the status, the equality between men and women. Because what is the consent of a person who is not authorized to unveil his face, to speak publicly to the television? How to validate this liberty? It is very interesting to enter in all the procedure, because before the vote itself, there was a public declaration of the French Parliament at the unanimity, confirming the basis of this immaterial public order. And then the votation was, if I remember, with the abstention of the part of the left, but there was not ambiguity about the sense and the signification of this law. And now we must conclude. Some adversaries of this law say that it was a nuclear weapon against a mosquito. Because there was only 2,000 women concerning with the burqa, wearing ostensibly the burqa, and since the law is adopted, there are 1 or 2 cases of infringement of this law. But the question is raised. The transgressions are few because the situation itself was insignificant and trivial, or there are few because the law has a deterrent effect, an impact. The question is open. And to conclude, my opinion is that the situation, the political situation of the French democracy facing the Islamic temptation is not simple. Many observers or analysts are saying that the leaders of the Arabic Islamic population is playing a double game. Overtly, firmly, they are for the integration in the condition that they themselves contribute to the definition of what is integration, on the basis of the fact that million people on the French territory, backed by all the Arabic population in the Maghreb, in the turmoil of the Arabic Spring, or Arabic autumn, and I don't know exactly the season. And also say that in the underground, we don't know what is happening. what are the very importance of the current named the Salafist current, which its aim is to Islamize the France and Belgium and Europe are Dar al-Islam. It's promised to be Dar al-Islam. In this context, to conclude, the situation of the Jewish community is a very important detector. The last demasking of an Islamic and jihadist network or cell, we don't know exactly the importance and connection of this net, has shown that the radical Islamic are recruiting now in the European and Christian-born youth, with the instruction that they don't change their name. They are converted to Islam and continuing to wear their Christian name. A limit here, psychic and politic, is exceeded. And there was last week a very important poll about the image of the Islamic population in France. It shows the very rapid, swift degradation of the Islamic image in the public. For at least 60% of the sample, for at least 15% of the sample, the Islamic people is not ready and not willing to be integrated in the French society and in its very way of life. In spite of the million and million euro diverted in what is named now the lost territories of the Republic. And most gravely, the distrust is growing about the elected people coming from, which is called, it is an euphemism, the diversity. And to conclude, I have read the news yesterday, the French Minister of Interior had expelled a radical imam coming from Tunisia to its country because of the violence of his speech in the mosque, that is shown that there is also police in the mosques. Thank you very much.